And sometimes those demos can get upgraded. If you nail it, they can get turned into the master that the artist ends up cutting. And so they'll just overdub their vocal on it, maybe some more guitar or change some things, and then put that out. And the demo you did 6 months to a year prior, if not shorter, will end up becoming a master recording. Traditionally, the demo thing is sort of the boot camp for the album session master musicians of the future. Some people end up stuck in the demo thing. Some people never make it past it. And I've never really thought of it that way, that maybe they work better on the fly, and maybe it's the jack of all trades thing coming back to haunt them. You never know. There are musicians that end up phoning it in a lot of the time and playing really right down the middle, vanilla stuff. Some people think that's what gets you to the top, being simple and never really stepping out, and that's just not true whatsoever.
Today our guest is Meinl Cymbals artist Jerry Roe. From where I'm literally standing as I type this, as I have a stand-up desk, Jerry is a rare breed. He's a Nashville native, and that's becoming increasingly harder to come by here in Music City, as the town is growing by leaps and bounds, with transplants coming from all over seeking their musical fame and fortune. Jerry comes by his abundance of talent honestly, as his family was and still is full of incredible musicians. So having been born and bred in Nashville and having music surround him his entire life, it's not a stretch to now find Jerry making a living as a session drummer in town. In fact, Jerry is one of the first call session drummers in Nashville. The guy is so humble that you would never know this, but don't be fooled. Jerry is in the big kids club as far as session work is concerned. Running parallel with Jerry's livelihood as a Nashville session drummer is the melodic punk hardcore sludge duo that he and his wife, B. Arson, comprise, Friendship Commanders. When Jerry's not at his day job doing sessions in Nashville studios, he and his wife are pushing forward with touring, writing, and recording with their band. Jerry became a Meinl Cymbal artist in the early 2000s when he was still a teenager, but even at that time he was on a major gig, as he had just landed the touring drummer role with who was then a very happening act in country music, Gretchen Wilson. Since then, I've watched and worked alongside Jerry through every step of his career. I consider him one of the most talented musicians I know, and I also consider him a very good friend. I recently sat down with Jerry to discuss a whole host of topics, and it's one of the more interesting conversations I've had on this podcast. Jerry's honest, and he doesn't hold back, but he always does so with integrity and consideration for others. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did. I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl podcast. Today we have one of my very favorites, Mr. Jerry Roe, with us.
Hello.
Jerry, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we are in a studio in Nashville that apparently has quite a bit of history. What's it currently called?
It's called Benchmark Sound, operated by Chris Utley.
And it was formerly known as Emerald.
Yes.
And some heavy stuff went on here, right?
Yeah, the confirmed recording that happened was Lee Greenwood, proud to be an American, of course. I know a lot of Hank Jr. was recorded here. A lot in that era, the 70s, 80s, into the 90s.
Nice. So, dude, we're just going to launch into some questions, all right? You just told me you didn't like talking about yourself, but we're going to do that anyway.
Great.
Because there's a lot of people that want to know about you out there. Even if they don't know, they want to know about you.
Excellent.
I got a bunch of questions here, about 10, in no particular order, really. My first one is that in the Nashville music scene, you're pretty well known, particularly in the session scene.
Yeah.
So outside of the Nashville scene, there's probably plenty of our listeners who are unfamiliar with you. Don't take that the wrong way.
Okay.
Just the way it is. All right?
Yeah.
You good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So strictly in the interest of filling in our listeners, if you had to shamelessly describe yourself, describe your career up until the point of like right now.
All right.
To someone who just did not know, what would that description be?
All right. To encapsulate me, I am a third-generation drummer, multi-instrumentalist, but primarily drummer, who started out in local rock bands, as you do, and also did my first session at the age of 11, moved into working independently and in the sort of, as it was known, Americana scene at the time in my early 20s. Got signed a couple times. It didn't work out. Toured all over the world with my bands and playing as a hired gun for artists throughout the 20s, and have settled into a session career in Nashville, and am currently in a sort of hardcore sludge metal band called Friendship Commanders.
So you had your first session at age 11.
Yes.
How did that happen?
No one else was available, and my dad was the bass player in the session. He said my son could do it, so he kind of threw me to the wolves. I didn't know how to read charts, the Nashville number system, or anything, and had to figure it out on the fly, which is really the best way to learn. But yeah.
Particularly when you have a relatively doting father.
Yes.
Who's going to be patient with you.
Yes, and he was definitely excited. He didn't help me that much because he knew it was best for me to kind of have to work for it.
Was anybody on the session a little bit rough on you?
Not really. Everybody knew me, and they were pretty into the idea. It wasn't a high-test session. It was a demo recording, like a demonstration situation. So we could take our time and make it work. But I vividly remember it was the 90s, so I was playing a real snare drum, real cymbals, and D-drum pads for the toms and kick drum, and side stick, because that was the era where they wanted a really loud side stick sound and found that the best way to do that was to trigger an Alesis D4.
Whoa. And you'd never played on triggered pads before?
Just at drum stores. I never owned anything.
Yeah, how strange. So, like, your first recording session, you don't get to play on the instrument you've been learning just every day regularly on.
Right.
You have to get onto this weird foreign object and figure it out, make it feel good.
Yeah, and the D-drum pads felt all right. It wasn't like old Simmons where you get tennis elbow hitting basically a non-flexible plank of wood.
Yeah.
But it was still strange.
That's awesome. Well, that's a pretty good description. That was quick. That's a good description. When you were touring the world, you said these were with indie rock bands?
Yeah, my first, let's see, where do you start? The first band I really toured the world with was a band called Legendary Shack Shakers, and it was a psychobilly band. It was very folk-influenced, rockabilly, punk, lots of Fats 2-4, lots of Motorhead influence in there. I lost 15 pounds playing in that band. Instruction I got was start the song off as fast as you possibly can, and I would quite often get that's not fast enough signal from the singer. So that was a lot of fun. But we went all over Europe and UK, all over the US. We're out for 6 months solid once.
Wow. And how old were you?
I was 20.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. And the first time I met you was in 2004. When I had just started at Meinl, I think it was 2004, there was a colleague of mine at the time, Maxwell Schaff.
Maxwell Schaff.
He introduced you to me. You had just picked up a gig with a singer at the time who was playing some big venues. Her name was Gretchen Wilson.
Yes, my first real high-profile road gig.
And how long did that gig last?
I was on that for 3 months. And my band at the time ended up playing some gigs without me, and I came back from overseas to see them play with a different drummer and decided I needed to try and make that work.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so everything else you said, though, is fairly self-explanatory. I mean, you moved into the session scene here in town, and then you're playing with Friendship Commanders.
Yeah.
So moving on, you began your professional career, I guess I kind of feel like the Shack Shakers, that was the start of your professional career?
Sort of, in a way. I moved out when I was 17, not because things were bad at home, but because the roommates I was going to move in with needed to jump on the house they had, and they either needed to have me come or get somebody else. So I moved out when I was 17, playing drums around on Lower Broadway around town, just doing in-town gigs, which was a brutal run, because those are long sets for not a whole lot of money, but I made it work. So in a lot of ways, I was excited to get out on the road, even if it meant leaving my band. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You began your professional career around the early 2000s.
It was about 2001.
Okay. Despite not living through the old days of country music, but based off the fact that you come from a family that was super prominent as musicians in the country music industry, I think it's safe to say you've got a solid feel for the timeline, historical timeline of this town.
Yeah.
Did Nashville and its music scene still have any of its old school charms and ways at that time, or when your career began, or was it already on its way to its current state of modernization?
It still felt very Nashville to me in the way that I had seen it growing up, in the way that it had started. It was still very much a familial group of guys that had the session thing sewn up. Lots of demo sessions, lots of master sessions. The songwriter community was strong. There was some outside influence in town, and there was a big retro revival thing happening, which has sort of led the way to the Americana thing and the roots thing being what it is now. The swing boom was happening, rockabilly was a big deal, alt country was strong, and I got to play a lot of that stuff down on Lower Broadway. It was a lot of fun. That's where I lived at the time, doing more of that kind of stuff.
And Did it today? Does it feel like you've lost something from that time?
Yeah, it does. There are a lot of people that have moved here from the outside and have created sort of cliques as such that, people sort of exist within, and not negative, or it's not negative or a bad thing necessarily, but it's allowed people that wouldn't have had a career back then to have a career here now. They don't really accept outsiders or really mingle with other people, but it seems like that's sort of becoming one big stew, possibly.
So for any aspiring drummer who's thinking of moving to Nashville and is going to establish a career, what would your advice to that guy be, or that gal?
My advice would be not to worry too much about being a jack of all trades or overly versatile. Have good tones, have a good attitude, be a nice person, play well, and don't worry too much about social media or public perception. That stuff may seem like it matters at first, but in the long run it won't. And having your own identity and style is what's going to get you hired over somebody else anyway.
So being able to do one or two things really well as opposed to being able to do a ton of things okay is much more in your favor.
Definitely. And if you're having to force it will sound forced anyway.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't sound that way to you, it will to someone else.
Well, regarding the versatility, when you play on sessions, you're required to go back and forth between really almost textural, ambient, rootsy stuff and also real straight-ahead driving four-in-the-floor stuff. It's either Levon Helm or Phil Rudd. That much versatility is definitely a requirement, correct?
Definitely. It will get you farther. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a requirement, because I think some folks who don't play old fields that well, when they're forced to play them, it kind of creates a modern take on things that people can appreciate. But in a demo session, a lot of the time people want the closest approximation to the real thing within 3 takes maximum. So being able to nail that very quickly and convincingly will get you very far.
Are there some guys that are nothing but a Levon Helm type of drummer that get put into a position where they're being asked to play a Phil Rudd thing and suddenly they're like, whoa, this is not me?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
And is that the fault of whoever is I don't know what you want to call it, the production manager for the producer? Is it that the fault of that person not hiring just the right guy for the gig?
It's hard to know where that ends and begins as far as responsibility is concerned. If the producer's making the calls, yeah, you should split a record up between the right players, or hire the one person that does all of it in the right way, or push the record all in one direction, which is usually what happens. But a lot of people can end up having loyalty that bites them in the ass at the end of the day.
So when you do these demo sessions,
yes,
where you play some different styles or different feels because of the different writers,
right?
You can get hired on to do an album from that session?
Yes, and sometimes those demos can get upgraded. If you nail it, they can get turned into the master that the artist ends up cutting. And so they'll just overdub their vocal on it, maybe some more guitar, or change some things, and then put that out. And the demo you did 6 months to a year prior, if not shorter, will end up becoming a master recording.
This is kind of an odd question, but just occurred to me. So would you say, is there such a thing in this town as more versatile drummers playing on demos, while there's more like kind of a guy that does one thing really well playing on albums? Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's an interesting question. Traditionally, the demo thing is sort of the boot camp for the album session master musicians of the future. Some people end up stuck in the demo thing. Some people never make it past it. And I've never really thought of it that way, that maybe they work better on the fly, and maybe it's the jack of all trades thing coming back to haunt them. You never know.
Yeah, I was going to say, what makes a guy get stuck? And it almost sounds like purgatory.
Yeah, sometimes there are musicians that end up phoning it in a lot of the time and playing really right down the middle, vanilla stuff. Some people think that's what gets you to the top, being simple and never really stepping out, and that's just not true whatsoever.
Who's the most daring drummer in this town that takes chances that just makes producers kind of go, wow, holy crap, that was crazy?
From me, our friend Miles has played some very loud, what you would call look at me stuff that's still very musical that has made it to the final product.
So we're talking about a fellow Meinl cymbal artist, Miles McPherson.
Yeah.
And Jerry, you grew up with Miles?
I grew up with Miles. We were in bands that played together back in the early 2000s. We both went off and toured the country in our own way and ended up coming back here to work on albums.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Miles played for Kelly Clarkson for a long time.
Yep.
He was her touring drummer.
Yep.
Guy rocks.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you'd say Miles has done some pretty outlandish stuff on a session that it is like, whoa, but it works.
Yeah. We both have the heavy music background. We've both brought that to some albums that we've played on. Just speaking not of myself and other drummers that I know. He's gotten away with some cool stuff. Ian Fitchick's doing some weird stuff on albums and making some really cool sounding recordings. My pal and sort of mentor Chris McHugh has done some really cool stuff on albums, more in the pop realm, but brought a lot of outside pop rock drum influence to modern country that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
So for a second, you were getting things going in Nashville and split and went to Los Angeles.
Yes.
Why?
Man, I'm from here. My whole family's here. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to play hard rock music. I just wanted a change, and I had a great time, but ironically enough, the first big session I did out there was a country session. It was the American Idol finale song for Scotty McCreery.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Did they know you were from Nashville, and that's why they chose you?
I guess partially, the band got put together by a friend of mine named Matt Rawlings. We were on the road with each other with Alison Krauss last year, actually. And, Matt recommended me. I think Chris McHugh partially recommended me, and it just kind of came together that way.
Did you feel haunted, or were you just glad for the work?
I was glad for the work, especially living in L.A. I magically never had to get a job living out there.
That's pretty magic.
And I didn't have financial assistance. So that the last year living there was tough because I decided to not tour. So I was very broke. But yeah, I made it work out there, and it was pretty funny. I was, I'm chasing the sort of Josh Freesian whatever thing. I want to play some rock music. And by then, rock as we knew it had kind of fallen by the wayside anyway. It wasn't really the big genre that it was for when I was growing up. But I still thought I would end up doing something. And so I ended up getting this big country session. Lee Sklar was on it. That was wonderful.
Well, beyond that one session, was there an identity surrounding you where, hey, this is the Nashville cat, Jerry?
Not really. I ended up playing some good fusion gigs. I played with this guy, Rafael Moreira. I did the second Magnetico record, which is his band. Ended up doing some really cool stuff. Played some jazz gigs. Did some LA's equivalent of singer-songwriter, a lot of the hotel cafe scene. And I had a great time working out there. I really did.
What made you decide to move back?
Well, I was with my wife the entire time I lived out there. We got married while I lived out there. And it started to seem like the best way for our relationship to thrive was for me to move back here. So I made the choice after getting the Katie Lang gig. The financial support showed up that I needed to move back, and I moved back while I was on the road with her.
And was your wife living with you out there?
She was not. We were separate.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a big impetus for coming back.
Definitely. I think living apart is actually a big part of why our relationship is as good as it is. We were able to do whatever growth and change we needed to do individually to be a better couple. And I have no regrets about how it went. It was definitely hard towards the end, though.
Do you sometimes now find yourself, do you ever hear your wife now saying, you need to go back out on the road?
Well, we go out on the road together and have
No,
a
I mean
great
by
time.
yourself.
No.
That would be funny if you got told that. Like, hey, I need you to leave for a while. We need some personal growth time.
I know a lot of people that thrive that way, definitely. But
yeah, I was going to say, do you think that there's some marriages that probably actually work because the husband or wife is gone all the time?
Well, I think alone time is very important with anyone, but we do really great spending basically all of our time together.
So now that we're talking about you and your wife being a band together, so Jerry is in a duo with his wife called the Friendship Commanders. Please describe the sound of this music and where people can find it.
We're a very melodic sludge rock metal duo with sort of punk and hardcore edge. And you can find all of our music and merchandise on our Bandcamp, friendshipcommanders.bandcamp.com. We are everywhere. Our music's on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music. But that's the best place to support us if you want to give us some cash. And, yeah.
Now, people may not know this, so I'll tell them. Friendship Commanders is an openly assertive, politically active feminist band.
Yeah, and I'll add LGBTQ ally band, something we care very much about.
Correct. So, does that present any issues for you in Nashville with people who know what you do? Does it present any issues on the road when you guys play shows?
It really hasn't affected me in town at all. There was a fear initially about me being an outspoken person politically. I think we've all sort of gone through that transition in some way because of the current environment. But I'm very outspoken about my political beliefs on social media and when asked, and it's never really caused me any problems personally. We've run into some strange stuff with the band, but we've navigated that fairly well, I feel like.
And what was the impetus for your becoming so politically active? Was there a sort of a moment in time, a flash of light that things dawned on you and woke you up to activism?
Well, I can speak to my personal experience. Buick has always been very active. She's done every AIDS walk that she could for almost 30 years at this point. She's been a very generally active person in the community, very against our current administration in general. And she really inspired me to give myself voice. I do nowhere near as much as she does, and she's been a big inspiration. But I learned from her how important it was to state your beliefs. I'm very fond of the way we handle it, which is that our music can still have personal meaning for you. It's not spelled out in the lyrics, and they're very personal songs. So they address topical things and subjects that are relevant to what's going on right now, but they can still be your own. You can still take what you want from them. And we don't necessarily go hard with it on stage, but in our charity work, in our messages, in what we align with, we are a politically active band.
You know, and it's not even an issue for me talking about it, but I guess it's because where we are geographically right now, we're in this traditionally red voting block of a state, but we're within a blue voting block of a city within the state.
Right, and Buick and I would say it's purple.
Red and blue, gray, purple? Okay.
Yeah.
My wife could tell me that. She's like, yeah, I know which color mixes with what. I don't know that stuff at all.
It's just barely blue.
Okay. So we'll call it purple.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I bring the question up about that, if it ever presents any issues. Because despite the progressive nature that Nashville has taken on with some outsiders who've moved here from the coasts and have brought that sort of thing here, there's still some of that good old boy feeling that is historical here. And I'm not saying one's bad, one's good. I'm just saying that's why I guess it dawns on me to ask these questions.
Yeah, well, and country music traditionally plays both sides. For the last few years, it got very right-leaning, almost by accident, largely just because I think a lot of the values that country music has touted and considered wholesome and family are now completely outmoded and outdated.
Would you say, historically speaking, like way back when, that some of the outlaw guys were like pushing a progressive thing early on before anybody else ever had?
For where they were and for the time, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think hindsight's pretty rough.
Right.
But at the time, yeah, and they were sort of rebelling against the very traditionally Christian, you have to do things a certain way, very strict way of life. They kind of came from bluegrass more than anything.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, given how different country music in Nashville is today from where it started, going back to the aspiring Nashville drummer thing, is there anything necessary that a drummer has to know from the back catalog of country music in order to come into town and have sort of like a basic toolkit for survival? Or if not, what do you recommend that they do know?
Well, you said AC/DC. I think having that rock vocabulary is great right now, but I think pretty much anything before 1980 in country music is just wonderful, genius music with some very strange, subtle playing on it, on every instrument.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Any particular examples?
Anything that Chet Atkins produced for RCA, Buddy Harmon, his playing was really strange. It was like a jazz drummer being forced to play quiet pop music with this country music, the whole like countrypolitan sound. It was an attempt at making country music crossover.
That's where all the reverb happened.
Yeah, that's where all the reverb happened. Lots of like brush and side stick stuff. Kick drums not happening in weird spots. Where to change the kick pattern, like dot it or just play it straight or not. Side stick method. And there's some great stuff in the 80s and 90s that is very applicable to now because country music's taking a hard turn back to the 90s currently. But you don't necessarily need it. I just think it would really inform the way you react to the other players around you because all that stuff influences what happens from the strings, like all the guitars and the banjo and the acoustic. That's all still there.
All right, so moving on in a totally different direction. So you're a studio drummer, you're behind a studio wall. You've got gear endorsements.
I do, thank you.
And you're welcome. How do you feel about gear endorsements? What's your take on that whole situation?
It's a weird environment currently. It seems like the session musicians are less valued in the world, and I don't know why. Not, accusing you of anything. You've shown me great support. You've shown a couple of great players in town here and people that work primarily as session musicians great support. But it seems there's a lot of emphasis on the sort of social media teachers, and that's totally fine. But yeah, the session guys have seems to have sort of support has dipped for us almost. That sounds sort of victim-y. I'm not really going at it like that.
No, I mean, it's just an observation on your part. And so obviously Meinl Cymbals, Craviotto drums.
Big Firth sticks.
No heads?
No head deal.
Huh. Do you feel like whichever company you've gone after for the head deal, do you feel like that what you just discussed, like the sort of the dip in recognition support is maybe why you've not gotten that head deal?
I don't really know, man. I'm a Remo guy, diehard Remo guy. They're the only thing that engineers I work with when I record. It's the only thing that sounds right to me. And I've been down that road a few times and almost gotten in, but actually twice it's happened that the A&R guy left. And I met the guy who currently works there, and he's great. It's just never seemed to move past a certain threshold. I guess they don't necessarily value, or I'm not out there being public with it other than with my band.
Sure.
So, not on a large level. We're playing small venues at this point. So, I don't know.
Well, I would counter that and say that at that point, it's up to the AR or the marketing at a said company to figure out how they could use you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not that they can't. Maybe it's that it just hasn't dawned on them how to.
Yeah, and you bring up something that is interesting to think about. Joe Testa, who has been great to me, he took over from Marcos Coley over at Vic Firth, who was also great to me. I've had a great time at Vic Firth. And with Craviotto, my relationship was mainly with Johnny, and I will always miss him. But the modern social media drummer that gives brands a lot of attention, they're sharing a lot of videos, a lot of stuff for them playing. I'm really busy in the studio, and showing up with a camera to record myself playing a song that's not out yet isn't really something you can do.
Right.
And if it was something you could do, people generally find it annoying and maybe just stop calling you.
Yeah. They don't want to see that.
Yeah, it makes it very uncomfortable. So it's a little strange to be playing on the stuff that's going out on the radio and becoming a hit and, not really being able to achieve any sort of fanfare for it. Not that I want it, it's not why I do this. But it has strangely contributed to it being sort of undervalued culturally, almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And again, I don't want to say anything negative about anyone who has a big video presence or instructional presence online. That's absolutely valid. They're great players. They're doing their own thing, absolutely. But it's strange. It's a weird thing.
Well, it's easier to figure out, I think, how to fit that person into a marketing schematic versus a guy who, like you said, is doing some serious work and is involved in a big production, but you can't go in there and record and then blast it on socials right away because it's music that's not yet meant to be heard.
Yeah, and it just makes the whole environment weird. You have a bunch of guys that all are trying to get their parts down and figured out and are dealing with what the producer wants versus what the artist wants, which sometimes it's great, sometimes there's friction there, and that's all part of the process of figuring out what works for everyone. Having a camera on in the background just makes everything weird. We have enough to deal with extra content being created while you're doing the sessions, and the artists have their own video crews in it a lot. So that's also extra weird.
Have you ever had a situation where, because it happens all the time in the studios, the producer will say, I don't like that ride cymbal that you're using. I'd like for you to please play this one that I'm used to hearing and miking up, and I know it'll get the sound we want. And at the same time, you've got a video crew in there for the artist. And so suddenly there's the potential for your non-endorsement cymbal, the non-endorsement cymbal on the kit to show up in video. Like the one time you do get out there into social land.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, that's rough.
And I was a Mapex artist back when I was playing for Gretchen Wilson. And the video for her second song, we shot it in a hurry in between sets at Fanfare, which is now CMA Fan Fest. So we just went on the stage, and I had used the backline kit, which was the DW. We taped over the logo, but there was really no way around it. And I got an angry call from Joe Hibbs, rest in peace. Rightfully so. But it just wasn't something I had control over at that point. I was able to put my Meinl Cymbals up, but...
Once you explained it to him, was he cool?
I think so. It sucks for everybody. It wasn't great that they didn't really help me out there. I tried to get him to, get a Mapex kit up, but, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah, they're like, no, dude, we got to get going quickly. We got one backline kit.
Yeah, and that is partially it. Demo sessions are a lot of where I would maybe have the leeway to take videos, but as you can see, there's a Yamaha kit sitting over here that never moves. And so it's part of why people hire the studio, because there's a kit here that's part of it, and I just have to play it.
Right.
Yeah. Even on big records, a lot of the time you're still playing on what the person wants. I usually always change out my brass, and I'm not just saying that. I usually use my own cymbals just because I'm so used to them.
Yeah, no, I know you do, or at least I believe you.
Yeah.
All right, dude, so we're going to wrap it up here, but I've got to ask the cheesy question, like, what's next for Jerry Roe?
Well, Friendship Commanders are going to tour all next year in support of our new album, and we're already working on new songs, so it's going to be a big, busy year for us there. And in the meantime, I'll just be playing on records here in town.
Okay, so that begs one more question. What happens when you go on the road with Friendship Commanders and you are gone and you're not around for calls?
It hasn't been an issue, and everyone around town knows what I'm doing. So, yeah, it's I miss some stuff, and that's okay. The band is what I really care about a lot. I care about this too, but I care about the band enough to make it a priority.
How do you let the producers know you're back? Do you physically call them and say, hey, dude, I'm back?
I don't really. It just kind of works out.
Huh.
The trick is to, when people call you, don't say you're on the road. Say, I'm booked, man. Sorry.
You just gave your trade secret away.
That's the rule for everybody. That's a pretty known thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Jerry, thanks for being here, brother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.